Depression is a thief. It steals a lot from us. And two of the things that it seems to like to steal the most are energy and motivation, which is probably why the third most popular question when I asked you a few weeks back what videos you'd like me to make in the community section of my YouTube channel was how can I improve my energy and motivation while recovering from depression? This is technically two questions, but I'm going to try to cover both of them. So, free bonus content today. Well, I guess it's always free, so that what I just said makes no sense. So pretend I didn't say it and let's just continue. Energy is your ability to do something. Motivation is your desire to do something. And so they are definitely separate resources. It's possible to have plenty of one, but not enough of the other. It's also possible to be completely depleted in both of them, which does happen frequently during depressive episodes. But I want you to be able to tell the difference in whether you're lacking energy or whether you're lacking motivation so that you know which set of interventions we're going to discuss today are the most likely to be beneficial to you. Because I see people mix these up all the time. If you are lacking energy, but you have motivation, that means you have a drive or a desire to do something. Like, I want to clean my house. I want to be more socially active. I want to go back to school. I want to go to the gym. There are things in your head that you're thinking, I would like to do this. I would like to accomplish this. But when you try to actually get yourself to do them, it's like it just doesn't happen. Like something gets lost in translation between the desire in your mind and your ability to actually execute the thing, and no action ends up happening. If that is something you experience frequently, I often see people label this as no motivation. I don't believe that is the correct label because you have drives and you have desires. I think this is an energy problem rather than a motivation problem. A motivation problem is when you really cannot think of anything that feels worth doing or that you want to do. And sometimes we have a low motivation and plenty of energy. I could do something right now. I have the ability, I have the capacity. I just can't find a single thing that I want to direct this energy to. Nothing feels worthwhile. Nothing feels enjoyable. This is something we often experience during periods of anhedonia. So it's very possible to have plenty of one, but not enough of the other. If you're lacking energy, this is actually probably the more complicated of the two because there are so many reasons why we might not have enough energy. I'm going to cover what I think are the five most common today. This is by no means an exhaustive list. But number one by far, if you're consistently lacking energy, this is the very first place I would encourage you to look, is sleep. There is no acceptable substitute for the energy that is created or replaced by sleep. I don't care how much caffeine you have. I don't care what your mindset is. Nothing can fix what sleep is supposed to replenish for you. There's no band-aid to this one. Almost everybody, 99 point some percentage of all people, needs somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5 hours of sleep per night to feel and function optimally. So let's assume you're in that range of people because you almost certainly are. Now, you might be adapted to less or more if you're struggling with insomnia or hypersomnia. That doesn't mean that's actually what you need. That doesn't mean that's what's optimal. It means that's what your body's used to because it's functioning under non ideal circumstances. Number one most important thing with sleep, have a schedule, have a routine, and do your best to stick with it. So I encourage people to pick an 8-hour window of their day and designate that as their sleeping time. It really doesn't matter what time this window is, as long as it fits in with your lifestyle and your other obligations. There's truly no right or wrong time to sleep. But during this 8-hour period of your day, there are two things you can do that are acceptable. You can be asleep or you can be trying to go to sleep. And if you're doing anything other than those two things during this 8-hour window of your day, you are not spending your time correctly if your goal is to have enough energy. Because there is nothing else that is going to be as productive as giving you energy than sleeping. Now, please hear me when I say this. I very much understand how frustrating sleep can be. I've not personally struggled with hypersomnia, where a person sleeps for like 10, 11, 12 hours at night. I have had long-term struggles with insomnia, long-term, like half my life on and off. I know what it's like when sleep becomes a stressor. I know what it's like when the most stressful part of your day is when you're getting in bed and trying to sleep. It doesn't change the reality that we're working with. You need sleep if you want energy. There's a lot of more advanced techniques that I've covered in other videos. But in addition to setting the schedule, and by the way, that 8 hours, We want it to be at the same time every night, 7 days a week, even on weekends, because that will help your circadian rhythm basically synchronize with the times of day. And it'll be so much easier for you to fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling rested. In addition to having your 8 hour sleep window, I would also strongly recommend that you designate a 30 to 60-minute period of time directly before your sleep window as your wind down window. And your goal during this period of the day is to prepare for sleep, to do things that are calming, relaxing, down regulating, and that help you get ready for sleep. Because when you're awake and alert and functional and like doing chores or watching TV, playing video games, your brain is very stimulated by these activities. And it's in what's called beta wave production mode. The period of time when you're tired, calm, relaxed, getting ready for bed, your brain is in alpha wave production mode. And then it goes through the sleep cycles on a lower level of brain frequency waves below alpha. When you stay busy and active right up until the moment you go to bed, you're essentially trying to skip alpha mode. And what's happening is you're not so much going to sleep as you are passing out, and you're missing part of your sleep cycle. So I know it's convenient when you fall asleep within like 2 minutes of getting to bed, especially if you have struggled with insomnia and you hate the idea of laying in bed awake, but you're never going to have enough energy if you live this way. You just won't because you're missing part of your sleep cycle and you're always going to wake up feeling a little groggy, confused, grumpy. So 8 hour window, sleep. 30 to 60 minute before it, wind down time. There's nothing that's going to substitute for that. And if you're not doing that, my remaining four items aren't going to do a ton. You have to get enough sleep. There's just no way around it. Second thing I'd encourage you to think about doing is make sure you're eating 3 decent quality meals per day and a couple snacks in between, probably. And just like with sleep, we generally want these to be timed at about the same time every day. Caloric energy, it's kind of a spoiler because the full word for calories is caloric energy. It's 2 words, but whatever, is a source of energy for your body and your brain. And if your body and brain are even mildly malnourished, you're not going to feel like you have a lot of energy. We fall into so many unhelpful lifestyle habits with sleeping and eating. They're so basic, they're so fundamental, they're not exciting or glamorous parts of life for the most part, I know. But so often I see when people get busy or they start to struggle with something, like these are the first things that they neglect. These are the first things that go out the window. And realistically, they should be the absolute last things that go out the window. Now, another thing I want to mention about food is overeating can also contribute to low energy because your brain also needs blood flow to function optimally and feel alert and regulated. When you consume a greater quantity of food than your body is used to consuming at that time, your body actually diverts extra blood flow to the digestive system to work on processing this relatively large amount of food more efficiently. And that's the real reason why after people eat a lot of food, they feel like a little bit groggy, maybe a little bit disoriented even. If you think of like the Thanksgiving food coma, for example, and people are sitting around like, oh, it's the turkey, it's the tryptophan. No, you binged. You ate too much food. That's why you're tired. Like it's not because of the freaking tryptophan in the turkey. It's because your body is desperately trying to process the much larger than normal amount of food that you just put inside of it. And that's really all it can handle right now. It's a very similar process to what happens when you consume alcohol. Your body prioritizes metabolizing what is literally a poisonous substance, and it doesn't have enough blood flow to power everything else that it normally does because your body, as far as blood flow, essentially functions on a power grid like structure that prioritizes most immediate needs. So moderate sized meals, 3 meals a day, probably a couple snacks in between, should keep your energy as high as possible from a caloric intake perspective. The third thing that I want you to consider if you're struggling with energy is taking a really hard look at your use of caffeine, alcohol, and marijuana. All three of these are not necessarily your friend when it comes to energy. Caffeine, I know, seems like it is. Caffeine's kind of a tricky one because in the short term, caffeine gives you energy. It causes increased blood flow to the body and to the brain. So it gives you that jolt, right? It gives you that kind of start. But there's a price to be paid later on. Basically, your body and your brain, when you're using caffeine, are running on overdrive. They go from maybe like 100% to 120%, for example. But when you push something to run on overdrive, There's a compensatory period where it has to run at below normal capacity to make up for the excess resources it expended previously. You can't just run at 120% all the time. So if you are a heavy caffeine user, especially early in the day, you'll notice that probably 6, 7, 8 hours after your initial period of caffeine consumption, you start to get tired. That's because you've gone from 120%, you start to slowly taper down to 100, and eventually you get down to functioning at like 80%. And that's when you get that groggy midday feeling. You basically got two options at that point: power through it or consume more caffeine. If you consume more caffeine around noon or afternoon or even early evening, you go into this overdrive period again, and now you're going to mess up your sleep because caffeine stays in your system for well over 12 hours. And when you try to fall asleep with caffeine in your system, you're either going to have insomnia, and that brings us back to point number one, or you're going to fall asleep, but your sleep quality is going to be poor because the caffeine keeps you out of the deeper stages of sleep. So even if quantity wise your sleep is fine, I hear people say this all the time. I can drink a cup of coffee at 6 p.m. and go to bed at 10. Yeah, maybe, but your sleep still sucks. Like if we did a sleep study on you, you would not like what you saw under those circumstances, I promise you. You're more like having a series of connected naps throughout the night rather than actually going to sleep. Alcohol, I kind of covered that a little bit already. It has a similar effect on your body as overeating. It becomes this priority that your body has to metabolize and work through, and it takes energy and it takes blood flow away from the brain. So both during and after periods of alcohol consumption, you feel groggy, you feel not yourself, you're in that low capacity mode again. Marijuana or THC actually interacts with your sleep receptors and it causes a lot of grogginess and fatigue. So that one's probably not as much of a mystery. I think most people know, smoking pot makes you a little bit tired. But science has definitely confirmed that that's not just like a placebo effect or something like that. So all of these substances really are probably going to work against you more than they work for you from an energy standpoint. That was actually points three and four because on my bullet points, I had alcohol and THC as one and caffeine as another. So those are the first four tips for energy. The fifth, this one might sound a little tricky too. Do some type of physical activity regularly. Now, initially, that's obviously going to take more energy than it gives, right? Think of it as sort of like an energy investment. Let's say you go for a 20-minute walk today. During that 20 minutes of the day, you are actually expending more energy than you typically would. So it seems like, well, that's going to give me even less. Like, I already don't have enough energy, and you're telling me to use more of it. Like, that makes no sense, but it will pay you back throughout the day because regular physical activity improves blood flow throughout your body, including to the brain. So your brain will work better all day long from even a brief, moderate intensity period of physical activity. It is going to create a net increase in energy, even though it creates an acute deficit in energy. Asterisk, as long as you don't overdo it. Like, if you go do some crazy work, if you're like, today I'm going to do 2 hours of CrossFit, you're going to feel awful for several days. So, like, pace yourself, right? Within reason. Those are my five interventions I'd recommend for energy. Moving on to motivation. This is a trickier one because a lot of people just assume if they aren't doing things that they want to do, they're not motivated. But if you want to do things, you're motivated. Motivation is not a mechanism to get us started on something. It really doesn't. Every now and then it might do that for you. It doesn't typically work that way. Motivation is a resource to sustain action we have already begun. The main reason I say that is what makes you motivated to do something is the feeling that that thing is worth it. The feeling that the reward in whatever way, whether that reward is like joy or accomplishment or connection, it can mean many different things, or a paycheck, even, right? The feeling that the reward eclipses the effort. In other words, when I do this thing, I get back more than what I put in. And so it feels worth it to do this thing. When you're trying to get yourself to do something that you either have never done before or have not done in a very long time, it is very difficult to convince your brain that that thing is worth doing because your brain does not have recent data on how hard that thing is to do or how good that thing feels. Take my example from a little bit ago about taking a 20-minute walk. If you haven't gone for a walk in a while, you don't really know how hard it is and how good it's going to feel. So your brain, it's not you think about going for a walk and your brain basically does this quick equation and it says, do I think that's going to be worth it? And what it's probably going to come back with is, I don't know. Like we don't do that very often. I don't really know how that feels. I don't know how hard it's going to be. I don't know if I'm going to feel good after. This is just kind of a big question mark to me. So very rarely in life are you going to feel super excited about doing something that you're not already consistently doing. So there is almost always going to be this awkward period when you first start or restart something of like, I don't know if I'm getting anything from this yet. You have to sort of take a leap of faith and exert a little bit of willpower to get yourself going. If you rely on motivation and go purely based on, do I feel like doing this thing or do I feel like this thing is worth it? You will almost never break out of your pre-existing lifestyle patterns because you don't have data on new stuff. So you start with willpower and you just kind of force it for a little bit. And then once you've done it a few times, then your brain collects data and it can say, I think that thing is worth it. It feels pretty good when I do that. I would like to continue doing that. And that's where your motivation comes from. Or sometimes your brain will say, nope, not worth it. Quit walking. Walking sucks. Try again. Pick something else. That'll happen sometimes too. And that's actually still a good outcome. It's all one big experiment. Life, mental health, because every single person has a different neurobiology, a different inner structure. That's why no one has figured out like an exact blueprint for live this way and you'll be happy and healthy, because there's never going to be one for all people. So there's always going to be some trial and error in figuring out what are the things that really give you like good mileage on your investments. That metaphor made no sense because you don't get mileage on investments. You know what I mean. You guys are smart. You can figure it out. Don't rely on motivation to get started. This is cliche, I know. Like this is kind of a meme or like a TikTok thing, but motivation is there to keep you going, not to get you going. You got to find something else to get you going. Willpower, drive, just acceptance that it's not going to feel great right away unless you find something you instantly click with. So don't rely on your motivation because it is fickle. It is. And it's not going to be super excited about doing something that you don't have data on. Really quick, two other things you can do to improve your motivation, given that it's about the interplay between reward and effort, is find ways to either increase the reward of an activity or decrease the effort. So, increasing reward could be pairing it with other activities to make it more fun, for example. So, like the walk, 20-minute walk. Going on a 20-minute walk by yourself versus going on a 20-minute walk with a friend. Going with a friend might be more rewarding. Or going on a 20-minute walk in silence versus 20-minute walk listening to a podcast. Now, again, this is where it gets tricky. Some people would prefer the silent walk. It's trial and error. There's no blueprint for this. You have to know yourself and you have to run some experiments. You have to try some things out and figure out what variant of the walk is most rewarding for me. Then you just duplicate that process. With effort, you can lower the effort or lower your perception of the effort. Trying to get it, can't get yourself to go on that 20-minute walk? Okay, try 10. Just continue to lower that effort threshold until action starts to take place. So hopefully, these tools help you with the lows in motivation and energy that tend to come with depression. Thank you guys for submitting these wonderful questions. I really enjoyed answering them. We'll do it again sometime soon. See you next time. Take care.